Today, we're talking about how to be an ethical data scientist. As actuaries, ethics and professionalism is at the heart of all of our work. But what specifically does this look like in the data science space? Joining us for this discussion is Lizzie Eason. Lizzie's an actuary currently working in a budding data science team, where her work as a data detective reveals insights so intriguing that business partners can't help but wonder what else the data could tell them. Lizzie, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Julia.
So, Lizzie, you and I are both podcast hosts, and in fact, I we first met earlier this year when Ari Bly connected us and suggested that I might be a good guest for your Raw podcast host, and that episode has now been out. So it's fun to turn the tables today and have you on the We Are Actuaries podcast. So thank you for being here from the other side of the
Yeah,
world.
it's funny to have the roles reversed and be in the interviewee chair now.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many opposites too, isn't there? Like it's very early in the winter, Sydney winter morning here, and you're in Colorado and it's warm in the middle of summer in the middle of the day. So,
Yeah.
it's super cool to have this conversation with you about a topic that's affecting all of us as a profession globally. And I know you're going to share a bit about your experience today, about what it means to be an ethical data scientist. So I'm looking forward to that conversation. But first, Lizzie, I'd like to ask you the question I ask all my guests, and it's this. Lizzie, how do you use your actuarial superpowers to make a difference in the world?
Well, Julia, with great superpowers come great super responsibility. And I try to use my actuarial superpowers in the most responsible way possible. And the way I do that is just by being really intentional about not only what projects I'm working on, but how I'm working on them. And a lot of the time, what that looks like is just going slowly and really thinking through every step of the process. I think, especially today in the age of like TikTok and like instant gratification and like all the dopamine being released all the time, it's kind of like countercultural to go slow on purpose. But I really think that when we slow down a bit and look at everything we're doing and are intentional about our choices, the outcome is typically much better.
For sure. Yeah, I think that's such an important point, Lizzie, because I think we it does feel like the world gets faster. And I know I've been working for just a little bit longer than you have, but just reflecting on the pace of how our work operates and the pace that uh, people expect things and our clients expect things, and we need to have our answers from our actuarial work. And I think that's a really, really important point to be slowing down.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's tough when you are working on deadlines. Like I know, especially with pricing, there's rate reviews and times you have to file by and things like that. But I've been really privileged in my career to mostly be working on projects that are pretty flexible with when they're implemented. And having the privilege of being able to go slow is definitely something I also acknowledge in my own career. So sometimes you do have to go fast. So that's unfortunate. And you just do the best you can. But when you are able to go slow, I highly encourage that.
Absolutely. And I guess even taking that one step further, if you need to go slower to advocate for that, because going fast just because that's what someone expects isn't going to be an excuse if there's a mistake or something goes wrong. You can't just say, oh, well, the client wanted it so soon, or I didn't have enough time to do my checks properly. So we still need to make sure we've got that rigor in our work as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So, all right, so let's get into this topic about ethics and actuaries and data scientists. I mean, why is ethics important for actuaries in data science?
Yeah. So I think ethics is really at the heart of everything we do as actuaries. And I know actuaries work in a myriad of fields, but particularly in insurance, where I think most of us are working, the idea of insurance conceptually, I think is one of the most ethical things we have implemented under capitalism. And I usually get funny looks when I say that, but like what I mean by that is the idea on a high level of insurance is everybody puts money into a bucket, and then we take that bucket of money and we give it to whoever needs it, right? So everybody's paying premiums for their car insurance, and then the person that gets in the car accident, we give the money to so they can indemnify. And I think we forget that a lot. Like I personally think insurance gets a bad rap as this really boring industry to work in, I think it's fascinating. And I think it's like really one of the most ethical things we're doing as a culture. Uh, so yeah, I think ethics is the heart of everything. And the two major fields actuaries work in, right, are pricing, segmentation, and reserving. Pricing segmentation is ensuring that everybody is paying a fair price, like we're ethically pricing to what people can pay, what they should be paying to make sure they're covering their risk and contributing to the community. Reserving is ensuring that we as a company have enough money to be able to indemnify people. So again, at the heart of both of those fields is ethical practice and like trying to do good for the world.
Absolutely. I love your point about, insurance gets a bad rap because I started my career as a life actuary. And I remember at the start just thinking, gosh, this is morbid. We're just thinking about when people are going to people are going to get sick or die. And the actual actuarial work behind it, especially when you're really junior, can feel very removed from that big picture. But I think when you can step back and think about what is that cause we're contributing to, it's such important work that we do as actuaries.
Yeah, I think so too. And one of the things I like to point out too is like bad things are going to happen, right? Like in life and health, you're not causing people to get sick, but you're preparing for when they do, because like bad
Mm,
things happen in the world.
mm.
And one of the things we used to talk about when I was in pricing segmentation and we were like ethically picking which predictors we could use for our models was what predictors are going to encourage good behavior. And this is a big conversation in telematics in particular, right? Like, what should we be pricing on? And ultimately, what I love about where the field of telematics is going is we should be pricing on good driving, right? Like people who are being careful in their driving should pay less money. And when we price on that factor, what we're doing is financially encouraging good behavior. So if telematics becomes more broad and people are aware that like better driving is going to make me pay less money, it will incentivize better behavior and less accidents overall, which
Mm.
is such a cool way that like I know there's a couple degrees of separation from like the final thing, but like if I as an actuary get to like build algorithms that make the world a safer place, amazing. So that's one of the big things we think about in pricing segmentation is like ethically which predictors do we want to be using to encourage good behavior.
That's such an interesting way to look at ethics because sometimes the ethics could be thought about as, do we have the right segments here? Are we making the right assumptions when we're doing the pricing? But the way you've just described it as well, are we setting this up to support society? Are we setting this up for more safety, for better outcomes? And I think that's a really interesting way to look at it.
Yeah. Well, and on that same note, other factors like gender, for example, like do we want to price based on gender or things that are like outside of our control, where like if we're pricing based on those factors, you're not incentivizing good behavior in any way. Like it doesn't help
Mm.
anybody to know, like, oh, I'm getting charged more money because I'm a man.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of what we talk about in like roundtables of what predictors are we going to be using is stuff like that. Like, do we want
Mm,
to price for things that are outside of people's control,
mm.
especially in
Yeah.
personal lines? Although most of
Uh,
my work has been in commercial.
right, right. Yeah. I think that gender one is a really interesting conversation. So I've got four young adult children who are all driving. They all have cars and driver's licenses and mixes of genders as well. And it was always an interesting conversation as we were going, well, how come I'm getting charged more because I'm a young man? That they all are good drivers, of course, because I taught them all to drive. So, but it's really interesting that we make these, because it's on average, this is what we see in terms of male and female drivers, and is that fair when it comes to that individual level? But I guess that
Right.
trade-off too between, as insurance, as you said right at the start, Lizzie, we're pooling risk where everyone's putting money into the bucket, regardless of what their risk looks like. And,
Mhm.
at what point do you sort of drill down and say, okay, well, we're going to give you exactly the price that reflects your individual risk, but actually we're pooling risk here. So it's an interesting
Yeah.
debate,
Yeah. And one of the predictors in particular I wanted to make sure we had time to talk about today was credit score, because
right?
that is such a controversial variable. I believe it's on the actuarial exams now as we talk about like the data quality in credit score. Should we be using it? There
Mm.
is some modicum of control you have over your credit score, right? And I mean, that's like a whole career field. Like, if you want to improve your credit score, you can like go to somebody and they tell you what to do to like raise your credit score. And at the same time, we know that credit score is like pretty racist and the data quality is like fairly low. So, should we be looking at that at all with the state of that data
Mm,
quality?
mm.
And
Such,
again, I think that's a big, I think on one of the written actuarial exams I took, I think that was like one of the questions was like the pros and cons of using credit score as a predictor. Because like
mm.
even if it's predictive, but it's only predictive because it's racist, probably don't want to do, right?
That's right. That's right. So just because we can look at something doesn't mean that it's the right thing to look at, and doesn't mean it's giving us
Exactly.
fair and ethical data to support our decision making.
Right. Right. And
Yeah.
that's the kind of like ethical discussion that like I think is really important to slow down and have because if you go
Mm,
really quickly and you say, "Oh, credit score, predictive power, great, let's use it," then like that's how you end up getting I mean a lot of times fined, right? Because people realize your pricing is highly unethical and then you'll get in huge trouble as a company and more importantly than the financial consequences, you just shouldn't be doing that because it's bad for the world. But yeah, that's why I think it's really important to go slow and not just be like, what's the most predictive model I can do? I'm going to use this, this, and this, and instead being like, wait, let's slow down. What are these predictors telling me? What is this model doing? And
mm,
like, let's really try to make sense of it before we just like roll forward with the most predictive thing we can possibly put out.
mm. Because I guess purely from a technique perspective, we can find out what is most predictive. But the question here is, what should we be using? Not just what
Correct.
could we be using, but what should we be using? What's the right thing to use?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so we talked about why ethics is important for actuaries and data science, that we need to broaden out and not just think about what can we do, but what should we do.
Yes.
Governing that, what should we do? What are some of the regulatory considerations that are affecting actuaries working as data scientists?
That's a great question. So I have not run into regulations as much in my current role because a lot of the models I'm building are internal and are not actually regulated by
Okay.
the government. Back in the day when I was in pricing segmentation, that definitely was a thing. There were a lot of, I want to say we called them crits we would do, where after you file a pricing segmentation model, sometimes the DOI will come back to you and be like, we have questions about X, Y, and Z about this model. And you would answer those questions. You'd be like, here's what this factor is doing, here's that. Not every state does that. It varies by state for sure, because there's some, and again, this is tickling the nostalgia in my exam era brain. I know there were exams that asked about this where it was like no file states and like file states where some of the states you can just like put in a pricing algorithm and they're like, cool, whatever. Other states are like, no, we have to like review it. So I know there's definitely different regulations by state and I'm not as familiar with that anymore. But 5 years ago, I could have told you.
Yeah, that's so interesting. But also, Lizzie, so you're talking about American regulations. And so, we're here in
Mm,
Australia, and
yes.
our podcast listeners span 98 countries around the world.
Oh,
Um,
amazing.
so, and just thinking, I haven't worked in pricing. I haven't really worked in pricing here in Australia, but I'm not familiar with kind of any government regulations around reviewing pricing models as such. But, certainly there are some regulations that govern, whether we're to the extent that we can be discriminatory or what kind of rating factors we can use, that they're statistically significant, that there's some sort of statistical basis for using them. And we also have regulations around our code of conduct here in Australia and as actuaries, and how that sort of governs our decision making as well.
Yeah. I love that you reminded me to be having an international mindset here because my credentials are in the United States.
Yeah.
And it's always so interesting to hear about the different ways different countries do this. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think regulations are super important.
Mm.
It's a tough balance of like how much regulation is useful. I also think who writes the regulations is super important. Like
Mm.
if I had all the money in the world and didn't like need to have a job that paid me super well. I think I would love to go into some government stuff and like help write some of the regulations we have,
Right.
because I don't think a ton of people go for government jobs just because they don't pay as well. But
Mm.
I actually think that those jobs are really important to figure out like what questions should we be asking when we're filing rates, and like how much regulation should be in place, because you don't want to have so much that like you can't make any progress.
Right.
I remember when I was doing my first pricing segmentation model, we were trying to implement the company's first model that used machine learning. So historically, we had done what's called generalized linear models that are very nice for interpretability because every predictor you're using has a coefficient tied to it. So you can say for every year older the client gets, I'm going to charge them 5% more, or things like that that are very interpretable. And those models are great, but they're usually less predictive power. And we wanted to try to like phase in some machine learning using a gradient boosting machine, which is less interpretable, but has way more predictive power.
Right.
And I remember when we were filing that model, the crit we got back, we were just like so frustrated because it was so clear that the insurance regulators just had no idea, no knowledge of any sort of machine learning concept.
Wow.
And we were like, oh my God, like how do we work with this? Which again, I think is why it's so important we get good people in government roles, like
Yeah.
helping with regulation, who are informed about like up-to-date data science topics. But yeah, it's a tough balance of like how to do regulation also.
Yeah. So how did you navigate that? Because I mean, you're basically saying you've got to decide between a model that's more transparent but less predictive, or a model that's
Yeah.
less transparent but more predictive. Sorry, is that
Yeah.
yeah.
So without giving too much away, this was 5 years ago and I don't work for the company anymore, but I'm going to
No.
try to not give away proprietary secrets
But
here.
principle
But
principle wise, how did you navigate that?
yes. Yeah, principle wise, we went with kind of like a dipping our toes in the water approach to integrating a little bit of machine learning.
Right.
So the final model we landed on was mostly still a GLM, but there were like small elements of machine learning kind of embedded in, and kind of taking like a baby step approach to sort of get regulators comfortable with the idea of like using some machine learning in a relatively inconsequential way. Like I think the machine learning didn't have like a massive impact on the model, which was sort of one of the selling points, is like, hey, this is like a baby toe in the water, little step. Like it's not, we're not totally overhauling to like a full uninterpretable, massively predictively powerful model. It's just like a little baby step into like, what if we tried a little bit of this?
Yep. Yep. So slowly.
Yeah.
Right,
Again,
right.
yeah, that's my whole thing. Is just go slow. Just don't. I mean, I don't think I would have even advocated for like fully jumping from
Yeah.
your GLM to like a full-on GBM. Like that
Yeah.
probably would be too fast. And like I
Yeah.
do think taking the baby steps, dipping your toe in the water is the right approach.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. Okay, so regulatory considerations. So you're saying that it kind of depends on what you're doing, what you're working in, and
Mhm.
what else? What else from a regulatory perspective is important when it comes to data science?
Yeah, I don't know if this technically counts as like regulation in the sense of legal government, but in terms of like the CAS regulation, I always like to fall back on ASOP 23,
Hmm.
which is the data quality ASOP, and it's a great one. Every single year for my continuing ed, I reread this ASOP thoroughly, and every time I like notice something new or like remember something I hadn't thought about, and it's really just a very well written ASOP, and critically important as data becomes a bigger part of our society.
Hmm.
Um,
And
so yeah, a lot of things I leave.
for our international listeners, Lizzie, so ASOP's a US actuarial standard.
Oh, are they? I didn't even know that. Okay, yes. Then say what ASOPs are.
Yeah, no. So talk to us. Like how is that helpful for you?
Oh, yes. Okay. So in the American, it is the American standards of practice. You're right. They are American. Wow. It's so fun to think about the whole world, not just my country. Okay. So ASOP 23 on data quality talks a lot about just ethical ways to handle data. A lot of the time when you are working on actuarial projects, almost all the time, actually, I would argue, you are probably not collecting your own data. Somebody's giving it to you.
Mm.
And so right off the bat, like you're not going to be holistically responsible for everything just because that's not feasible. You're not going to be with the data from time of collection to time of analysis. So there is again, a balance to be struck in terms of like how much are you responsible for and how much is just has to be out of scope for you. One of the things specifically this ASOP points out that I think is really important is you are not responsible if somebody else has intentionally fabricated data. So you are not required to like go down a whole rabbit hole of like, do I trust the person who collected this data? Do I think they were making it up? I usually do some like little testing just to make sure. I know there's been a couple times when I don't know if it was actuaries necessarily, but like data scientists in general have caught fabricated data by like doing tests on certain columns and being like, this is a little bit too perfect of a normal distribution.
Wow.
And it's like, oh yeah, that seems like it was made up. So I do like to do a little bit of that, but again, there's a balance of like you can't spend your whole life like trying to make sure there wasn't a bad actor. But I do think it's useful to review. And one of the things the ASOP also says explicitly is you are not required to audit your data, which audit they define as like a very deep, involved process of like diving all the way into like everything that's ever happened to the data. But you are required to review your data, which is like audit light, where you kind of see, does the data make sense? Make sure you understand what all the fields are. Maybe talk to the person who gathered the data if you can, just to get like a better feel for it.
So just
So yeah,
some
reviewing.
reasonableness checking, like making sure that you're
Yes,
not just blindly taking on a data set and working with that without doing any kind of checking around that, around the validity of the
precisely.
data.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense because otherwise we've got this situation of garbage in, garbage out, right? No matter
Yes.
how sophisticated our models are, if we don't have good quality data and reliable and reasonably accurate data, and it's never going to be perfect. I mean, that's one of the things we do as actuaries, isn't it? We need to make assumptions. We have to deal with incomplete data, or not always great quality data, and be able to manage that and handle that as part of our analysis.
Yeah, that's such a good point too. I just ran into a situation in my personal life where I had a friend who was upset I had made an assumption about her. And I was thinking about it and I was like, we kind of have to. Like,
Hmm.
definitely lead with curiosity and ask lots of questions. But at the end of the day, there's only so much your brain can take in. And like, you're going to have to make assumptions at points. And I think, again, circling it back to ethics, I think being able to name those assumptions is really important, but you are still going to have to make them. Like you
Yeah.
can't know everything. You're not going to check every box,
Yep.
but if you can at least name like, here's what I had to assume in order to do this in a reasonable time frame, I think that's really important.
I agree. I think that transparency is really important and making sure that we're not blindly applying those assumptions, that there's a
Mm-hmm.
reason for them, that we're conscious of that. We've done some thinking around why that's the right assumption, and that we're transparent about that too for users of our results.
Yes.
It's really, really important.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else on the regulatory side of things?
Disclose your sources, which I think this kind of also ties into like being able to name your assumptions. Like if you are using a source for something, make sure you know how to name it. And this is a huge thing in the era of chat GPT and like LLMs in general of like, I think the biggest flaw, although I don't know, there were many with like the first version of like, I think GPT 3.0 was the one that like made waves and everybody heard
Yep.
about. The biggest flaw in that is like it didn't cite its sources. So it would tell you a thing and you'd be like, cool, that's the answer. And it's like, well, where did it pull that from?
Yeah.
Like how it had the whole internet as its, training data.
Yeah.
Did it get that from WebMD or did it get it from Johns Hopkins or did it get it from some guy in his basement whose, credentials had been revoked 5 years ago? I don't
Or
know.
did it just make it
So
up?
we're just making it up, right?
Yeah.
So like cite your sources. That is
Yeah.
one of the biggest things. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's it, and that's I mean that's such an important thing to do through our work, but also if we're relying on others' work, whether it's an AI tool or whether it's a junior team member as well, making sure that
Mm-hmm.
we've got that transparency about where things are coming from.
Yes,
Yeah,
100%.
yeah, yeah. Perfect. Okay, so final big question for you. Want to come back to this idea of ethics. So, how do you navigate ethics as a data scientist?
Yeah, I think a lot of the things we just talked about, I will probably reiterate along with my own pieces of advice. So, again, going slow. And along with going slow, I think one of the really important elements is to admit your mistakes and be humble. Because even as you're going slow, you're gonna mess up. Like you're not gonna think of everything, and no matter how hard you try, mistakes are going to happen. And when they do, admit it. Like don't get defensive and be like, no, 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 but I did my best, and therefore it's fine. No, bad things are still going to happen, and like being able to quickly admit your mistakes and roll with it is going to be way better in the long run than like trying to play this game of like, no, 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 but I'm perfect and nothing could have possibly gone wrong because I'm an angel and I've never made a mistake in my entire life. So we're all humans. Embrace the mistakes and fail fast. I think that's a lot of the big companies that are doing very well are good at failing quickly and just like getting back up and recovering. Um, so definitely being humble, admitting mistakes. I
And
also
mistake
would say,
and mistakes do happen, Lizzie. I mean,
oh,
yeah, like
100%.
yeah,
Yeah,
I just do. So I love that as your first tip because I think, yeah, that just knowing that does happen and knowing that it's better to just be transparent about that and just roll with it and deal with it. And you're not the only
mhm,
person to have ever made a mistake.
yes.
But yeah, it's just yeah, that's a great tip. Thank
Yeah.
you.
And hopefully, if you're in a company that's supportive, hopefully people are assuming positive intent from you, right?
Yeah,
Because like
yeah,
everybody knows you're doing your best, you're trying.
yeah.
Nobody that I'm aware of is like making mistakes on purpose or
No,
like wanting to be a bad actor. So like
no,
also when you catch mistakes of others, like having some humility there and giving them grace and assuming positive intent, I also think helps with that like fast fail
for
process.
sure.
Yeah. Second thing I would say is to try to keep humans and the human experience in mind with everything you do. So again, with like ChatGPT and like as data science progresses into this like incredibly powerful field, I think thinking about how we want to harness technology and where we want to continue to have human work be the thing is really important.
Mm.
um, I have a lot of friends who are artists, and I remember when some of the first LLMs came out that were creating art, there was a lot of controversy around like, but art is something that we want artists to do. Like,
Mm.
artists enjoy the process of creating art, and like, part of that is like, part of the art is like the human who did it and like the artist. And
Mm.
like, I think we maybe jumped a little too quickly into like, let's have technology do that. And it's like, are we sure? Are we and maybe we are. I don't think technology shouldn't do art at all. I think it's kind of cool to like see what technology can do. But again, going slowly, thinking about like the human experience and like, do we want to take away jobs of human artists? Personally, I would say no. Other people may have other opinions, and again, I don't think technology should necessarily not create art at all. But I do think we should think about like, how is our use of technology affecting the human experience, and is that like what we want it to be doing? Because ultimately, we're creating technology and doing data science for the sake of like making all of our lives better. And sometimes we lose sight of that in the excitement of how cool the tech is. So like really keeping a broad view of like, how is what I'm doing affecting the human experience?
Mm. Mm. And I guess that's at the crux of ethics, isn't it? Because ethics is where the answer isn't clearly right or wrong, yes or no, should we, shouldn't we? It's that gray
Mhm.
area. And that's the place where we need to have those discussions. And as you say, go slowly and step back and think, just because we can generate art with an AI tool, does that mean that we should? Does that mean that we should
Right,
be creating all of that? What does this mean? And
right,
actually thinking, looking at all the nuances there. Yeah.
right. Yeah, yeah, 100%. And then the last thing I would say in terms of navigating ethics as a data scientist, peer reviews. Peer review, peer review, peer review. You are not an island. Have other people look at your work.
Yep.
I Again, you could spend your whole life like thinking about a problem, coming up with things, and if you go to your neighbor in 5 minutes, they're going to come up with something you'd never thought of because they have an entirely different life experience than you do. So harness the power of your community. Yeah, peer review all day long.
Peer review, such an important tip for all aspects of our actuarial work.
Yes.
Lizzie, it's been wonderful hearing a bit about your experience in as an actuary in data science, some of the regulations that we could be aware of, and some tips around navigating ethical decisions, and your top tip around being going slow and really thinking about just because we can do something, should we do it? I'd like to finish our interview with this final question, and it's this. Lizzie, what's your top tip for actuaries wanting to maintain ethics in data science?
Yeah, I think this applies both to your career in data science and also like your life in general if you want to be like an ethical human. Uh, and it's akin to the line of peer reviews, but it's building a really diverse personal board and harnessing their input in everything you do. Because I think a diversity of viewpoints is so important in ensuring you've considered something from multiple angles because again as humans it's impossible not to make assumptions. Our brains only have so much power. Like we are going to see everything through our own lens. We can't not, right? I mean, you can empathize all day, but like you still have your personal life experiences that are going to color everything you think about. So
Sure.
including the perspectives of a diverse group of people who again will assume positive intent from you, who you assume positive intent from, I think at the end of the day will make you not only a more ethical data scientist, but also a more ethical person.
Not only an ethical data scientist, but a more ethical person. What a great, great message. Lizzie, thank you so much for your time today. I'm sure this conversation will be very helpful for actuaries and data scientists around the world. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Julia. It was fun switching roles and being in the interviewee chair today.